Welcome to the webinar on capacity market metering. Thank you for attending. My name is Ian Nichol and I am the EMR Metering Assurance Manager for EMR Settlements. Today I'm going to be joined by David Williams from the Delivery Body and Bede Burke from the EMR Operations team. So the agenda for today's webinar is we're going to start off with David going through the process for metering assessments. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions. You'll be able to do this live if you look to the right-hand side of the screen. Then we'll focus on capacity market rules, focusing on metering statement submissions and metering test request deadlines. There'll be an opportunity for further questions. And then we'll go through some useful hints and tips to get you through the metering test statement process first time and identify any common issues that we've encountered during the previous 2 years of the service. And then we'll finally talk a little bit about the site audit process, which you may be involved in, and then we have a quick feedback poll question and then a final roundup of any questions that are asked. The slides and FAQ will be issued shortly after this webinar by the end of this week. So I will now pass you over to David.
Thanks, Ian. Morning, everybody. Just need to check I can get through the slides. There we go. Oh. Just bear with us 2 seconds. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So I'm going to go through the guidance for capacity market participants on metering assessments process that you go through via the Delivery Body portal. This is based on the guidance document that will be refreshed and uploaded on our website, probably either by the end of the day or tomorrow first thing. You'll be familiar with the kind of contents of the guidance. It's very similar to what it's been previously, with a few kind of slight amendments that hopefully you'll pick up on as we go through. We're going to go through an introduction and purpose as to what a metering assessment is. We're going to go through some of the deadlines that are available for around the metering assessments from previous auctions and agreements that have already been put in place, and also give you an outline of some of the deadlines coming up for those of you who've entered the most recent pre-qualification process and deferred your metering assessment. We'll then go through completing the metering assessment within the portal, and then just kind of briefly touch on some of the key questions within the metering assessment that we focus on as a delivery body to instruct EMRS to either conduct a test or not. So the introduction and purpose: essentially all CMUs that are awarded a capacity market agreement will need to complete a metering assessment. The metering assessment determines the metering arrangements on site and the requirement for a metering test. A metering test determines whether or not the metering arrangements constitute an approved metering solution. That's a capitalised term, and I believe is in the definitions of the rules if you wanted to have a look at an approved metering solution. But they have been approved by the settlement body, EMR Settlements, and is an arrangement for metering equipment for A, a generating unit that is not a BM unit, or B, a DSR CMU component, and C, a CMU that is a partial BM unit. If a metering test is required, then this will be undertaken by EMRS, and the delivery body will instruct the EMRS that a test is required following the answers that you provide to us in your metering assessment. If you want to find out a bit more about the testing process, then when you get this guidance note out, then you'll be able to click on that link that you can see on your screen there and have a look at some of the guidance that EMRS have put together. They've got some really good working practice guidance documents that take you through the processes. It's reliant on the capacity provider to provide the delivery body with a metering test certificate once you've completed your test. We're working on the portal at the moment to make sure that that's something you can provide to us via the portal. That it's important to stress that it's up to you as the capacity provider to provide us with a metering test. We're normally copied into the email that EMRS provides. However, the rules constitute that it is the capacity provider that needs to provide it to us. So we need an email confirmation with the certificate in from yourselves before we can accept the test certificate. You should also provide a detailed line diagram showing electrical configurations and metering sites at which the generating units or DSR components are located. Some of you may have submitted those in pre-qual, even though you've deferred your metering assessment. That's fine. If that still remains current, we'll have a look at that as we go through the assessment of your metering assessment responses. If you haven't provided that, then you'll be able to do so via the portal, and instructions of how to do that I'll go through later on in a few slides' time. So what is a metering assessment? A metering assessment is a questionnaire relating to the metering arrangements for a CMU. It's completed by you, the applicant, and you have the opportunity to either complete that at your pre-qualification application process, or in most cases you have the ability to defer your metering assessment, in which case you have a deadline, which I'll be going through in a second, to provide us with those answers to your metering assessments and complete your metering tests if required. These are completed via the EMR Delivery Body portal. Hopefully you're all familiar with the portal, and I'm sure you all love it. And this now includes all auctions. So I know in previous guidance, the T-4 for delivery year 2018-2019, the first kind of pre-qualification applications were going through an offline process. All the information has now been migrated into the EMR Delivery Body portal, so you should now be able to, for those of you who have remaining deadlines, be able to submit your information and your responses to the assessment questions via the portal like every other auction now. Single line diagrams showing electrical configurations and metering sites at which the generating units, just move something out of the way, bear with me, or DSR components are located should also be provided to the delivery body, which I've discussed, within the same timescales. So there are separate sections within the portal, both on the same kind of screen, but they need to be provided at the same time. So you can see there on your screen a bit of a rough outline of what the metering assessment process is. Essentially, you, the applicant, completes your metering assessment on the portal and submit that to us at the delivery body. We then review your answers to your questions, and we then determine, based on those answers to those questions, whether a metering test is required or not. We then update the registers, and we inform EMRS and you, the applicant, whether a metering test is required or not. That's basically the process. So these next few slides are going around the deadlines for metering assessment and metering tests. Now they normally are the same dates across the different auctions, but let's go through the ones that are remaining. So you'll see some of them that are greyed out. That's because those deadlines have passed, so there's no need to worry about those anymore. So for the T-4 2018-19, for new build and refurbishing, you have, as a new build, you have until the 30th of September 2019. As a refurbishing unit, you have until the 30th of September 2018 to provide us with your metering assessments via the portal. An unproven DSR, you have until the 31st of August 2018. All of these kind of, how these dates come about are all covered within the capacity market rules. So if you're unfamiliar with them, it's worth having a read through just to refresh yourselves. The T-4 2019-20, for a new build and refurbishing, you have, for a new build, 30th of September 2020, refurbishing the 30th of September 2019, and for an unproven DSR, you have until the 31st of August 2019. So there's still some time to have a look at those and get those in, but I guess the advice is the sooner you can get them in, the better. But obviously for new builds and refurbishing, that may not be possible until you've got all of your equipment in place and ready to go. Next slide, continuing on. So the T-4 from 2020-2021 delivery year. A new build, you have until the 30th of September 2021. For refurbishing, you have until the 30th of September 2020. And an unproven DSR, you have until the 31st of August 2020. All of the other dates for last year's pre-qualification process have passed now. And then this is now the current, most recent pre-qualification period that we've just gone through. So these are your dates. And for anyone who's just pre-qualified, just so you're aware, if you are fortunate enough to get an agreement out of the other end, these are your dates. So for an existing generating interconnector and proven DSR for the T-4, you have until 3 years prior to the start of the delivery year to provide us with your metering assessment, which takes you to the 30th of September 2018. For a new build, you have until the 30th of September 2022, and for refurbishing to the 30th of September 2021. And on proven DSR, you have until 1 month prior to the start of the delivery year, which is the 31st of August 2021. Now for T-1, there's a slight change here for previous years in the rules. So there is a rule that states that if there is less than 8 months between the auction completion and the start of the delivery year, you have 4 months prior to the start of the delivery year to provide your metering assessment. This differs slightly from previous years. So the deadline for an existing generator who's entered the T-1 and an interconnector and a proven DSR is the 30th of May 2018. For a new build and refurbishing unit, you have until the 30th of September 2018. And for an improving DSR, you have until the 14th of September 2018. The testing dates, I'm not going to run through in detail like I've just done. These will be published after the webinar, so please have a look through. Essentially, the dates for the metering assessment and the metering test, there's no differential in the rules. So you need to have completed your metering assessment and your test, if applicable, by these deadlines that we're talking about. So please bear that in mind. So I'll just leave the next slide up for just a second. This is for the T-4 2020-2021, the early auction 2017-18, and the transitional auction for 2017-18. And then these are the final slide. These are the dates for the most recent pre-qualification process that we've just been through. So those are your dates. Okay, so the next section is around how you provide us with your metering assessment answers. So for all CMUs in all auctions, the online process is as follows. So step 1, log into the EMR portal as your main admin. Hopefully you're all aware of how to log into the portal. If you have any issues with your passwords or anything like that, then your main admin should be able to reset or reactivate you. If you have any further problems around that, then please just give the EMR Delivery Body team a call or email us at emr@nationalgrid.com. Once you've logged into the portal, click on My EMR and then click on My CMUs as illustrated on the slide there. Hopefully you're familiar with that structure. The next screen will show all CMUs which you've got in your portfolio. You need to find the relevant CMU by entering the CMU ID into the search box at the bottom of the table. There are a series of filter boxes underneath the list of CMUs that you've got. You need to filter to the one that you're responding to. Once you've found it, on the right-hand side of that list, you'll see a series of boxes, normally edit, view, those types of things. You should see a button that says edit after PQRD. You need to click that button, which will then take you into the main page really, which has a series of tabs as illustrated there. So you have the main page, construction plan, metering information, planning consent, and security interests. Funnily enough, you're going to be clicking on the metering information tab. You then need to scroll to the radio button for defer CMU metering assessment for settlement. This will activate the metering assessment question. So all you're doing there essentially is changing your answer from yes, I want to defer, to no, I don't anymore, I want to respond to the questions. When you do that, it will release a series of questions that you need to answer. So CMUs with multiple components, you'll notice that there's only room in there to provide metering assessments across the whole kind of picture. The advice there is really to kind of answer these questions on a lowest common denominator kind of approach, really. So please answer the assessment questions. If you have any of them that would trigger a yes or a no to any of those that would trigger a test, you need to answer with that CMU component in mind. The Delivery Body portal does not yet have the functionality to allow applicants to complete multiple metering assessments, so we're advising you to take that approach. If I flick onto the next slide, so this is one of the most important parts of the assessment period. So there are a series of questions depending on what CMU unit you are. These are the 4 questions that will drive whether you need to have a metering assessment test or not. So metering location is the first question. Are the meters on the boundary point with the distribution network as opposed to embedded within the site? If the answer to that question is yes, then no metering test is required. If the answer to that question is no, then a metering test would be required. Multiple connections. Does the site have additional connections to the distribution network other than the connection used by the CMU component? If the answer is yes, then no metering test, then a metering test is required. If the answer is no, then a metering test is not required. And then generating units with associated load. Is there other load or generation on site, I think is how the question appears on the portal, other than the CMU generating units and their associated demand? Again, if the answer is yes, a metering test is required. If the answer to that is no, then a metering test is not required. So essentially, any answer that gives you a metering test is required will automatically trigger a test. So some of those you may answer no to, and it will tell you that a metering test is not required. But if any one of those triggers a test, then a test will be required. You then need to provide us with your selected proposed metering option. And again, there's more detail on this within the capacity market rules, but essentially this indicates which of the 3 metering pathways you're going to be using to monitor the performance of the proposed CMU component should it be awarded a capacity obligation. You've got A, supplier settlement metering configuration solution, B, bespoke metering configuration solution, or C, balancing services metering configuration solution. Now on the portal there is further explanation of what each of those means, which is in line with the explanation that appears in the capacity market rules. But essentially, if you answer A, a metering test is not required, B and C will trigger a metering test. And that kind of concludes the section from me on how you go around your metering test, metering assessments. I hope that's clear. If you have any questions about this after the webinar, we're obviously trying to answer any questions via the chat functionality, and we will be putting together an FAQ sheet of any questions that we can't answer today. But if you do have any other questions specifically around your CMU, then please do email us at emr@nationalgrid.com or give us a call on 01926 665 300, and one of the team will be happy to help. Thank you very much. Pass you back to Ian.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. That was very helpful. So now I'm going to move on to the capacity market metering test. Just a little disclaimer that you should always rely on the regulations and the rules when making any determination when it is you have to complete certain activities by. So the agenda we're just going to go through. We're just going to go through quickly the recent capacity market rule changes that impact the metering. Metering statements, just the process, some helpful tips to get through it, and just some common issues we've encountered in the previous 2 years of the service to help you try and avoid those, and just a little bit about site audits should you be involved. So moving on to the changes in the capacity market rules, these are related to the metering statement submission and the metering test request. Up to now, the only deadline specified in the rules was to complete the entire process and, if required, to present your metering test certificate to the delivery body by the deadline specified in Rule 8.3.3e. What the rules are now requiring is that any metering test request and metering statement is submitted a period before that deadline to allow the metering test process to be completed, and should any issues be identified, to give you time to rectify those. So the rule in question came into effect in July 2017, and it is number 13.3.2a, and is part of the overall metering test process arrangements. The deadline now specified for submitting a metering test request and statement is dependent on the type of auction, so is it a 1 year ahead or a 4 year ahead auction, the category of the CMU, and you have to take account of the time between the auction results day and the start of the relevant delivery year if it isn't a 1 year ahead auction. You can find the capacity market rules at the link seen on screen. So we just look at the timescales. Each CMU category can be split into 3 different types. Unproven DSR is irrelevant of the time between the auction results day and the delivery year. It's always 4 months prior to the start of the relevant delivery year. And if we look at proven demand side response, there are 3 options. If you're a 4 year ahead auction, it is now 21 months prior to the start of the relevant delivery year, where the deadline for the metering test certificate is 18 months before the start of the delivery year. So that's a 3-month window to complete the metering test process. You'll notice that in a 1 year ahead auction, there is a difference depending on whether there is more or less than 8 months between the auction results day and the start of the delivery year. So it could either be 4 or 5 months, 4 if it's less than 8 months, 5 if it's greater than 8 months. One point to note that for prospective CMUs, that the requirement is to complete by the long stop date, and this is different depending on whether you're a new build CMU or a refurbishing CMU, and in the case of a new build CMU, whether it's in a 1 year ahead or a 4 year ahead auction. You should always refer to the rules to determine which one is applicable to your CMU. So if we run through an example, so the next deadline is related to proven demand side response and existing CMUs that were successful in the T-4 auction in 2015. So this is for the delivery year that is going to start in October 2019. So the date following 21 months prior to the start of the relevant delivery year is your cutoff for submitting your metering test request and your metering statement. So for this year, the last working day of 2017 is the 29th of December 2017. So if you have any capacity market units that require a metering test that fall into these categories, you have to submit to EMRS before the end of the year. We advise you to contact EMRS as soon as possible if you are required to do this. If we look at a 1 year ahead example, if the time between the auction results day and the delivery year was less than 8 months, we're looking at the date falling 4 months before the start of the delivery year, which will be the 1st of June. So if you have any queries on any specific dates, we advise you to contact EMRS and refer to the relevant section in the rules, and have a look at the capacity market register, which will confirm whether you need a metering test. Please remember to look at the correct CM register for the relevant auction. So we're just going to go through the metering test process and some useful tips and hints for how to manage your metering statement submissions. So as David has spoken about, the trigger for a metering test is dependent on how you have answered the metering assessment questions. So the delivery body will notify you if you require a metering test for any CMU. You then have an obligation to provide a metering statement. Once received, EMRS and their service provider, the metering agent, will carry out a desk-based analysis of that metering statement. This is the metering test. And should it be passed, we will issue a metering test certificate to the capacity provider, and the obligation is on the capacity provider to submit this to the delivery body by the deadline in Rule 8.3.3e. There's also a secondary assurance process as part of the metering risk assurance framework, and this is a site audit. I will speak about this at the end of the webinar, but this is something that is carried out after the metering test certificate has been issued. So for those of you that haven't been involved in the metering test process up to now, it's useful to just quickly go over what it is that the metering test is trying to achieve. Basically, it's to provide evidence to prove that you're using an approved metering solution. So the high-level objectives of this are to determine that your metering is compliant with the relevant governing documents and the capacity market rules. And if you're a generating unit, that your metering system is delivering net output. So this is gross generation less any electricity consumed by the generating unit to be able to operate. This is referred to as the auxiliary load in the regulations. Alternatively, if you're a demand side response CMU, we need to make sure that all imports and exports of electricity to or from that component are being metered. Another part of the test will determine the overall accuracy for the metering system, and in some cases this has to be within certain limits. This is the case for the balancing and settlement metering codes of practice and the bespoke technical requirements in Schedule 7 of the rules. And how is data going to be sent to EMRS? So this is the data submission method for either your BM unit meter volumes, your MPAN data, or in the case of non-settlement processes, your CSV file. So what are the requirements of the metering statement? These are detailed in Schedule 6 of the Capacity Market Rules. Essentially, it can be summarised as information about the setup of your capacity market unit and the metering systems used within it, technical specifications of the equipment used in that metering system, calibration test certificates for the constituent parts of the metering system, so this can be meters and measurement transformers, evidence to prove that the metering is set up and been configured correctly. This is what we would call commissioning evidence, and the method that data is provided to EMRS. Where a non-settlement process is being used, an example of the CSV linked to the commissioning evidence will have to be provided to successfully pass the metering test. It should be noted that not all parts of Schedule 6 will be applicable to every metering system. Schedule 6 covers everything from transmission-connected power stations all the way down to small-scale bespoke auxiliary load circuits. And where something is not applicable, if you could state in your metering statement that it is not applicable, that would prevent any delays and having to clarify whether it is relevant to you or not. Some useful links, the Capacity Market Rules themselves, where you can see Schedule 6 and Schedule 7. The metering test process that is on the EMRS website is Working Practice 197. The metering statement guidance that we have published is Guidance Document G20, which we advise reading prior to submission of any metering statement. So I thought it would be a good time to go through some useful tips to help you get through the metering test process first time. So one of the questions we were often asked is there a format for the metering statement? There's nothing specified in the rules, but EMRS would recommend using a tabular format detailing each section from A to R of Schedule 6. And then where the data can be populated in an adjacent column, you should do so, or alternatively refer to separate attachments that should be submitted with the metering statement. So in the example we can see on screen, this is Section C for a half-hourly metering system that's using the supplier settlement metering configuration solution. And all the relevant required details have been completed. And where details are not applicable to this metering system, that has been stated in this table. One point to note is that where a check meter is required, the check meter also has to pass the metering test. The reason for this is that should your main meter become faulty, data from the check meter will be used as part of the capacity market settlement process. So we need information on both meters. As I mentioned earlier, it's not always possible to provide the information in an adjacent column. So in this example, for the meters, which is Section L of the metering statement, there is a reference to a separate appendix, which is for metering test certificates, which would satisfy the requirements of this part of the metering statement. One of the things that I just mentioned was on attachments. One of the things that has cropped up a number of times is that the attachment names have not been consistent with the metering statement. So if you could use something that is relevant, so in the previous example, metering test certificates, it is easy to identify and is easy to spot when going through the metering test and will make the process more efficient. Could you also please check that prior to any submission that you've included all the attachments referred to in the document? If any attachments are missing, this can delay the metering test or result in a failed metering test. We would also ask that you do not embed any attachments within the metering statement document, as they can become corrupted when sent via email, and this can again delay the metering test process or result in a failed metering test if it cannot be rectified within the timescales for completion. In an ideal world, the metering statement would be perfect first time and the metering test would be passed first time, But that isn't always the case. In some instances, the metering test is initially failed and some issues are identified that have to be resolved. Where you find yourself in this position and you have to resubmit a metering statement, we advise using version control. So if you could call any resubmitted metering statement by a different version number, so if you were submitting for a second time, please call it version 2, and then increase that number for every subsequent submission that is required. We would also advise you to help speed up the process to identify what has actually been changed through a change amendment record, an example of which we have shown here. On the second submission, you can see that the metering test certificates for the check meters have been included and the CSV file that was required. We would only advise to submit separate attachments again where there has been a change to those attachments, and again, please use version control on them to make them easily identifiable. Doing this will speed up the metering test process, because if we do not know what you've changed, we will have to do the entire metering test process again on the full metering statement, where we would potentially only need to check off 1 or 2 items. To be able to complete the metering test, we need to know some additional information. So one of these is the rating of the generating unit and the rated capacity of the circuit. The reason we need to know this is because the requirements for the metering equipment vary depending on the rated capacity of the circuit. This is applicable to supplier settlement metering through the BSE codes of practice and the bespoke technical requirements in Schedule 7. If we do not know the rating of the circuit, we do not know which metering equipment criteria we should be testing against. So if you could please include within the metering statement the rating of the generating unit in kilowatts or megawatts, and if we are going to talk about the rated capacity of the circuit, if you could use kVA or MVA. Again, this will prevent any delays in the metering test process where we have to clarify what we should be testing against. Another piece of information we cannot start the metering test without is what metering configuration solution you are actually using. So if you could state on the metering statement whether you're using settlement metering, either supplier or balancing mechanism units, bespoke or balancing services, this will allow us to progress the metering test. And where you're using multiple metering systems, if you could identify for each one what metering configuration solution is being used, as you can have a combination of metering configuration solutions. For balancing services metering configuration solutions, there are defined in the rules what the relevant ones are in terms of the metering configuration solution. These are frequency control by demand management, short-term operating reserve, and firm frequency response. The requirements of each of these agreements in terms of the metering vary, so unless we know which one you're actually using and the metering should comply with, we cannot start the metering test process. Again, this can result in potential delays and failed metering tests. On some occasions where the setup of the metering system is of a complex nature involving multiple metering systems and complicated data collection methods, if we do not know how your system is configured and how, in the case of a generating unit, net output is derived, it can result in delays and failed metering tests while it is clarified how the system actually works. We would suggest having a short executive summary at the start of the metering statement explaining how the metering is set up. The example on the screen describes how 2 metering systems are used to determine net output and how the data is taken from the meter into a data collection system and how that is ultimately sent to EMRS in a CSV file format. This will speed up the metering test process and help to get through the process first time. So still continuing on with multiple metering systems, we would need to know how these should be treated to determine net output. So typical examples where multiple metering systems are used are where there is a gross generation meter and a separate meter for netting off auxiliary load, and in some cases where there is ineligible generation, so this could be something that's in receipt of a low carbon subsidy, that has to be excluded. So we would require an aggregation rule at a high level to be able to know what the meter volumes for the component are determined to get the net output. And if you could identify what meter does what on the single line diagram, that would ease this process. So in the example shown here, the single line diagram identifies meter M1 as being the generation meter, and the second meter M2 is for auxiliary load meter. This would then result in an aggregation rule where the net output of the generating unit is the active export from meter M1 less the active import of meter M2. So if you could include that aggregation rule as part of the metering statement, that would ease the process greatly. Continuing on the auxiliary load theme, where multiple generating units are sharing an auxiliary load circuit, BAEs have clarified that there is a methodology for determining any apportionment multiplier for that auxiliary load where those generating units either belong to different CMUs or only one of them is involved in the capacity market. This is based on the rated output of each generating unit. So EMRS, where an aggregation rule includes any apportionment, require to know the basis for that. So in the previous example, if rather than 100% of that active import meter we were only using a multiplier of 0.67, we would need to know the justification for that multiplier. So the methodology for doing this is based on the rated output of the generating unit. So if in an example there were two generating units, one rated at 300 kilowatts and the second rated at 150 kilowatts, the apportionment multiplier is the generating unit involved in the capacity market, which in this case is generator 1, divided by the total rated output of all generating units associated with that auxiliary load. So in this case, 300 divided by 450 gives us a multiplier of 0.67. We also would need confirmation of what generating unit is involved in the capacity market, and the single line diagram should include both generating units and clearly identify which is in the capacity market unit. So if we look at this example in terms of the single line diagram, we have generator G1 identified as the CMU metering point. We have the auxiliary load circuit identified, and we have the generating unit G3 is not part of the capacity market unit but is also using that auxiliary load circuit. Another piece of information that we need is a metering configuration solution and identifiers for all components making up the capacity market unit. The metering test certificate is based at a capacity market unit level and not component level. So if not all your components require to complete a metering test, they still need to be included on the metering test certificate. So we would suggest using a summary table that can be seen below, where the CMU is made up of 5 components. The first 3 are using supplier settlement metering. The MPANs would be identified, and it would be highlighted that no metering test is required for these metering systems. And components 4 and 5, we have the metering configuration solutions identified. One is balancing services and one is bespoke, and these do require a metering test. So we would only expect a metering statement Schedule 6 to be completed for components 4 and 5, but we would need the identifiers and the metering configuration solution for components 1, 2, and 3 in addition to that. And your certificate, once all metering tests have been passed, would include all 5 components. Based on our previous experience, we've identified some common issues where it would be useful to provide some clarification and guidance on to help you avoid making the common mistakes that we've encountered in the past 2 years in the service delivery. So one of the main areas of concern has been on measurement transformer burdens. So the measurement transformer burden in section M is referring to the connected burden. This is the burden imposed by any equipment connected to the secondary side of a measurement transformer. This is not the rated burden of the measurement transformer that section J requires. So the rated burden is the maximum burden that can be connected to a measurement transformer to allow it to operate accurately. This is stated on the rating plate and the calibration test certificate provided by the manufacturer. This is not what section M requires. That is what section J requires. So if we look at this example of a voltage transformer rating plate, you can see that there is a VA figure quoted of 50 VA. This is the rated burden, and this is the type of evidence that should be submitted as part of section J. Section M is only interested in the connected burden, or what is commonly called the working burden, and this is of all equipment that is connected to the secondary side of measurement transformers. This can either be determined through a measurement or through an estimation process. If you are going to estimate the burden, we need the justification for that estimated figure. So this would have to include all equipment connected to the secondary side of the measurement transformer. So for example, this could include meters, modems, relays, and instruments. And it must also account for the resistance imposed by the cable connected to the measurement transformer that runs to the meters. So we would expect to see evidence from the technical specifications for equipment connected as to the burden imposed, and for the cable we would expect the length of the cable run and the resistance of that cable. And if you could tell us the length of the cable, whether that is one way or includes the return cable as well. Another area that has caused problems is measurement transformers that are of multi-ratio type. Section N requires evidence to prove that the metering has been commissioned, and this includes the measurement transformers, and this must include what ratio, where there is a choice, that the metering system has been connected to. An example of a multi-ratio current transformer would be something where you could have an option of being a 200 to 5 amp ratio or a 100 to 5 amp ratio. All ratios would be stated on the rating plate of the measurement transformer and the calibration test certificate provided by the manufacturer. So just a high-level diagram of what this actually looks like. You have an option of either selecting the 200 to 5 amp ratio if you connect at either end of the current transformer, or if you connect to the middle setting, it will be the 100 to 5 amp ratio. So in this simple example, it can be seen that the meter is connected to the 100 to 5 amp ratio. So any evidence submitted for Section N as part of the meter measurement transformer commissioning has to confirm what ratio has actually been selected. This limits the allowed options that you can use. You cannot use the option to provide a download of the metering configuration setup, as that does not prove what ratio that the meter is connected to matches the CT configuration. So the evidence submitted must confirm what ratio the meter has been connected to, and this is either through primary injection testing or comparison with an independent metering system, where we can determine that the meter is recording the same primary energy as an independent system. So examples of independent metering systems are generation control units that would show the kilowatt or megawatt output of that generating unit, which can be compared to the meter. It is key that this is independent from the metering system, so if that system is independent system is based on an output from the meter, that would not be compliant with Section N in this instance. So one of the other areas that has caused problems is the meter proving test. The purpose of a proving test is to confirm that primary energy measured by the meter can be accurately submitted to the data collector or EMRS directly. So typical techniques are to compare the submitted CSV file or half-hourly data held by the data collector with a cumulative register advance over a half-hour period, a download using the meter manufacturer's software to compare with, an independent half-hourly metering system, or where the demand or generation is fairly constant, evidence of the instantaneous value at the same time that the CSV file data has been submitted for. So to be able to determine that the proving test has passed, we need the time and date for all submitted evidence. So this must include the format of the time, so this can either be British Summer Time or Coordinated Universal Time or Greenwich Mean Time. And in the case of the CSV file must always be in local time. So this is BST format post the March clock change and GMT post October clock change. The evidence used for comparison with the CSV file can be in either time format, but the metering statement must confirm which time format that evidence is in. Failure to do this can result in failed or delayed metering tests. So I'll quickly touch on the site audit process finally. So as part of the EMR risk assurance framework, a percentage of CMU components that undertook the metering test will be randomly selected for a site audit. All capacity market unit components are split into risk categories depending on the metering configuration solution used. It should also note that the settlement body, the Electricity Settlements Company, can select any CMU for a site audit irrelevant of whether it has or has not had a metering test prior to this. So, following a metering test certificate deadline, the settlement body will determine the percentage of CMU components to have a site audit based on the risk categories. These are, for settlement metering, split between central metering registration service, so this is balancing mechanism unit metering systems, settlement metering and supplier meter registration service, so this is anything that would have an MPAN, and then non-settlement, so this is bespoke and balancing services metering configuration solutions. So once determined, EMRS will randomly select the CMU components to have a site audit. We will notify the capacity provider. Our service provider, the metering agent, and the capacity provider will agree a mutually convenient date for the site audit. Once completed, the metering agent will submit a report to EMRS. Should you be submitting data through the CSV process, the site audit cannot be completed until EMRS have received that CSV file for the date of the site audit through SFTP. If you have not set up your SFTP process, we suggest you contact the EMRS Operations Team Service Desk to get set up to be able to do that. Once EMRS receive the metering agent report, we will either issue a compliance or a non-compliance notice, depending on the result. And we will also notify the delivery body and the settlement body of the result of any site audit. So some useful links for this process are Working Practice 196, on the EMRS website, and if you haven't undertaken a metering test prior to this site audit, you'll be required to submit a metering statement, so we would advise you to read through guidance document G20 prior to submitting any metering statement. So some useful contact details and further information. If you wish to contact the EMRS metering team directly, you can do so at the email address on screen. If you wish to contact the EMRS service desk, so this is if you had any queries about data submission and the SFTP setup process, if you can contact that email address or call on the number seen on screen. The EMRS website contains all the working practices, guidance, and settlement data, which you can find on that link. And then you can sign up for EMRS circulars, where you'll be kept up to date for any upcoming events or announcements. We also have some stakeholder support and settlement data areas of the website. This will help you get through the process of credit cover, registration, and metering. This can be seen on the screen now. It is available on the metering EMRS website. And again, you can look at important information, so settlement data, the settlement calendar. This includes things like key payment dates and capacity volume register. So we're now going to just put up a quick feedback poll. We'd appreciate if you could quickly answer the question that should be appearing on the screen now. I'll just give you a few seconds to complete that. Well, thank you for those that have submitted an answer. That's greatly appreciated and will help us in the development of any future webinars. We'll just give you a few more seconds. There's still some participants are just submitting their answers. Thank you for that. So we go through any questions that have cropped up throughout the webinar. We'll provide more detailed answers if complicated questions, but as part of the pack where the slides are issued. But we'll deal with anything that's cropped up that's nice and straightforward.
Yes, we've received some interesting questions. I think I think the most important question that's been asked is will a metering test certificate be valid in subsequent auctions?
Oh, that's a very good question. The answer is yes. We would not repeat any metering tests. We would advise that when you submit metering test certificate to the delivery body, that you do notify them that if the CMU ID has changed, that nothing else has changed, so that metering test certificate can be used for subsequent delivery years. One point to note that, as I said before, that because the metering test certificate is based on the capacity market unit, should you swap components, you would need to have a new metering test certificate, and we would only have to do a full metering test on any new components that had not completed the metering test process. So if, for example, you had a capacity market unit that had 3 components, they all required a metering test in one auction, they all passed, we issued a metering test certificate, included the 3 components, but in a subsequent delivery year, you decided that rather than having one CMU with 3 components, you wanted 3 CMUs, where each one of those components became a separate CMU. Each one of those new CMUs would require a metering test certificate. In that instance, we would ask you to contact the EMRS just to clarify what components have been moved into what capacity market unit, and we will just do a check to make sure that we have completed the metering test previously, and then we will reissue a certificate. As I said before, that we will only do a complete metering test on a metering system that we have never looked at and has not gone through the test previously. Likewise, if there have been any material changes, so if your metering system that was tested has been completely upgraded, it requires potentially a new metering test certificate, or at least as the requirement in the rules that you have changed the information submitted as part of Rule 3.4.3 during pre-qualification. EMRS under Rule 8.3.3F, you have to notify the settlement body and the delivery body about what the changes are, and they will give you approval once it has been confirmed that it is up to the same standards as the previous metering system. So, any other questions?
Yes, we've had another question related to the site audit and the time frames to letting capacity providers know that their CMU or sites will need a site audit.
Yes, the way the process will work is that once a metering test certificate deadline has passed, we will know the volumes of metering tests that have been completed. We will then discuss with the settlement body how many sites there are, and they will make a determination of the percentages. That process usually is completed within a month of the metering test certificate deadline. We will then randomly select the sites and notify the capacity provider. The site audit process is that we will always give you as much notice as possible. The date will be mutually agreed. The only stipulation is that the site audit has to be completed during the relevant delivery year. Any other questions?
No, I think that's. No, I think that's about it for the questions, yeah.
Oh, thanks, Pete. If you do think of any subsequent questions after this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact us on the addresses both for the delivery body and for EMR Settlements Body that we have presented. So thank you for your time and joining us on this webinar, and slides and a copy of the answers to the questions will be submitted hopefully within a couple of days of this webinar. Thank you for joining us.